Everyone get their little notifications? We love to see it. Okay, so go ahead and get started here. Okay, so we're so happy you guys are able to join us for this Feeling Myself event hosted by AYL. Just to give you guys a quick rundown on what we expect for tonight, we're going to have an introduction of our amazing guests, the topics, and then we're going to cover current events of African affairs. Then we're going to go to our pre-made questions for our panelists. And then we're going to go to audience questions, anything that was sent in through the Google form, or any questions that you want to ask throughout the presentation, you are allowed to. We have it set on anonymous for you guys to ask all the questions that you wish. And then finally, we're going to conclude the night with our AYL mission statement, as we always do. So first, we're going to get started with current events. The UK is imposing sanctions on Zimbabwe's governing officials regarding their human rights abuses and their killing of protesters. The sanction has been out against the country since 2018, and Zimbabwe says that it's made an impact on their economy, even though sources say that the collapse of the economic realm is actually due to corruption. One of the UK moves is to harden the diplomatic relations with Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe's 3-year-old government. So then we're going to go to our next aspect of it. For this presentation, just going to give you guys a quick disclaimer that this space is meant to be very much inclusive and safe for all those who have questions. Please don't be afraid to ask questions. There's, I can never say this word, but you are anonymous whenever you ask those questions. Be respectful of others and their questions as well. Please use I statements. Don't share the experiences of other people. And please, let's not generalize any populations either. So we're gonna go ahead and get started with our guest panelist introduction. So give like a warm virtual welcome wherever you guys are to the amazing women that we see on screen.
Okay, so our first panelist is Karen Hewitt. Pronouns are Z, here, she, her. Karen is a multifaceted woman, a Columbus local artist, a performer, writer, poet, singer, healer, curator, and creative. Z wears many hats. Karen is passionate about the hard work of advocacy, transformative justice, empathetic leadership, education, creativity, and connection. Currently, Z serves as Deputy Director for Kaleidoscope Youth Center. Karen also facilitates and consults in diversity management, anti-racism, and transformative justice. In September 2020, Karen was awarded the Create Columbus Visionary Award. Karen serves on a variety of committees, commissions, and collectives in Columbus to further advance the work of racial and social justice and create visibility and representation for Black, queer, non-gender conforming / non-binary intersection in these spaces.
All right, our second guest is Erica Butler, pronouns she and her. Erica Butler is the founder of Happy Sex Talk LLC, knows her way around difficult conversations. Joining the field of sex education in 2005, she has taken on a wide range of jobs over the past 16 years: peer educator, community-based educator, community education major, adjunct fill-in, and consultant. When Erica isn't developing sex education programs, curriculum, workshops, and seminars that are affirming, age-appropriate, and comprehensive, she is spending time with friends and family or continuing to grow her practice in Columbus, Ohio. And her self-proclaimed hero, Black woman, all of us, we're amazing.
And our third panelist is Constance Dunlap, pronouns she, her. Constance Dunlap is a radical sexuality and reproductive health educator, minister, and pursuer of justice. For over 15 years, Constance has created and facilitated comprehensive sexuality education and community engagement programming centering youth, adults, people of color, and faith communities. Unapologetically, she is a participant in the social, political, and spiritual witness of Jesus Christ. Constance is the founder and executive director of Reconcile and Reclaim Collaborations, LLC, which strives to restore the unity of sexuality and faith. RRC facilitates comprehensive sex education sessions, community events, professional development, and couples intimacy coaching, centering openness, honesty, curiosity, and integrity.
Thank you so much, Evoid. We're really appreciative. And give a round of applause to our amazing panelists, you guys, wherever you are. I know you guys can't really see each other. So we're gonna go ahead and start off the Q&A question session. And if you have any questions along the way, drop them in the chat. We have our moderators looking out for questions, and they will filter it all the way to us so you're able to get anything you want answered. So our first question is, what inspired you to go into this professional route?
And then here's like, who's going first? Don't all go at once. Oh, I guess I got to now. I unmuted myself. So I guess I'll go. Yeah. So what inspired me to go into this professional route? So when I was in undergrad at Miami University, I took a course in HIV and AIDS, and I knew I was going to go some form of public health. I didn't really know where I was going to end up. Nothing had really struck me in terms of subject areas that I was really interested in. And then I took this HIV and AIDS course, and it like changed my life, finding out that we're such a small population, or a small percentage of the total population, and yet we represent so many of the newly diagnosed HIV and AIDS cases every year, like blew my mind that I didn't already know these stats and that I didn't have any idea of this information. And so I was like, well, that shit's got to change. So I'm going to go in the field and make some noise about this. And then when I realized that, public health is a little different vibe, they tend to look at things a little bit negatively in a way. It's like all things that we need to fix and things that are like broken that need models on how to nothing is fun, nothing is pleasurable, nothing is like sex is fun. Like in general, it's all like, no, it's death. It's these stats, it's this, take all these condoms, take all this, and I was like, I just can't exist in that space. So I Googled, getting a master's in sex education, like, oh, somebody's got to have this program somewhere in the world. And sure enough, right outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, there was a program. I enrolled, moved, and the rest is history. So, but it was definitely a matter of, I wanted to be in the Black community, educating them about what was going on, because I felt like nobody was talking about it. And I felt like there was no space to talk about pleasure in that realm either. I hadn't really heard conversations like that. I didn't grow up around conversations like that. And I just wanted to, be a part of that shift. So here we are.
All right, I'll do the thing. So good to be here with everybody today. I have had an interesting mix of career and stuff to get here. I was a college basketball coach. I worked in HR and workforce and development, and now I'm working in HR and workforce and development at Kaleidoscope. It's also coaching. So when I think about the work that I do, everything that I've done up to this point brings me here, and I've been an advocate, and for obvious reasons and for not so obvious reasons, around social justice and racial justice. So Kaleidoscope was really the way to be the culmination of all of my interests and all of my advocacy and put it in one space. And I'm even, encouraged to, as an artist, I'm encouraged to, that brings visibility and representation into this space. So really at Kaleidoscope, it's about being, their whole self and belonging and visibility and representation and advocating for our youth and listening to our youth and being youth led, because really mostly they've got it figured out. So in this space, this is like bringing all the elements of the things that I care about, that I love, that I would die for together. So that's how I kind of got here. And, once you kind of see it with all those lenses and all those perspectives, it's hard to unsee it. So I'm glad to be with Kaleidoscope, and I'm glad to be here with you.
Hey everyone, so I'm Constance Dunlap. Her pronouns are she, her, they. I think what got me onto this professional route was a combination of obviously personal and also academic. So I went to Cornell University undergrad, and we worked with a group of teen girls who were incarcerated. And when we went there, you know, we did a lot of conversations about faith and sexuality and things like that. And the staff there always wanted us to fix the girls, to figure out how to make them not gay. And they were so bothered by this phrase that they used, gay for the stay. Like they were so bothered by the relationships that would spring up between the girls, that they wanted us to kind of figure out a way to discourage it and put some, you know, theology behind it to kind of wield more authority. And there was a young lady in one of those presentations who kind of got up and was like, listen, like, I hear what y'all are saying. And I wasn't there when this happened, but there was this girl that got up and said, you know, I understand what y'all are saying, but all the relationships I ever had with men, those are the people who abused me, who molested me, who hurt me. This is the first time in this relationship with this female that this is her words, and this female in this unit with me, this is the first time that I have felt loved, affirmed. Why wouldn't God appreciate that? And when I heard that question, I was like, yo, we need to actually stop and listen to what this person has said to us. Like, this is not something we can just explain away with our normal, like, pray about it, fast about it, like, just say no. Like, this person has a legitimate question on the table that we really need to have a better answer for her. And so at that point is when I decided to go to seminary and to really examine more closely faith and sexuality and how we got here, and how we got here in terms of making people be so at war with their faith, with their bodies, rather, with their sexualities, with their identities, and their faith. Like, it led me to kind of figure out a better way for us to talk about this and a better way for us to understand it. Because, like, I don't know, it was too important, you know, that young lady's question and an answer to her was too important to me, to just leave it to like a generic Christianese, as we say, answer, and then go about my business. So that's kind of how I got here. I mean, yeah, I you know, got a master's degree in faith, sexuality, religion, gender, and sexuality, and then worked at Planned Parenthood and worked in childcare and all that. But like, honestly, it was working with those young ladies in Lansing, New York, that really got me to where I am now.
Thank you for explaining your journey. I really appreciate it from all three of you. It's really impactful to know what led you to this route as educators. So for our next question, it's, what does having a safe space to express your sexuality or explore yourself sexually look like? And how can marginalized communities, or the communities that you guys work with, achieve this freedom?
I'll go ahead and take this one. And I'll come off mute. I got it. 2021. I'm on it. So we say safer spaces, we never say safe. And what I think that, you know, when we're talking about LGBTQ plus youth, if you haven't heard of Kaleidoscope, it's LGBTQ plus youth center serving young adults, youth and young adults from 12 to 24. And when we say safer because we can't guarantee safety. And especially when you look at the way, you know, oppression and everything is set up, you can't always guarantee that. So for me, a safe space is generally one that I create, or people that are open-minded or, you know, comfortable or easy to talk to create. When I think about safe spaces, I think about being harm reduction. Like, so we're harm reduction. So how do we talk about things in a way that doesn't shame and guilt people into doing things, right? And I know we'll get into that a lot more in terms of, you know, religion or marginalized communities, but a lot of times marginalized communities as a whole are policed more often in their tone, in their way of being, in their expression, in their identity. So when you're looking at that, what does safe mean to me? It means that people are aware of all the multiple ways that you can show up, and that there is room for all those things to be there, and not just be welcomed or tolerated or maybe invited, but to actually be like invited to come in and welcomed and created in a belonging type of atmosphere and an affirming type of atmosphere. That's what safe means to me. Yeah, I'll leave that there.
I don't really have anything to add to that because that's really what I, would have kind of gotten to the point of probably rambling a little bit more, but gotten to that point. But I do want to say that I appreciate you explaining the safer space versus safe, because lately, specifically, I've been struggling with that word safe because it didn't feel right to me. Like it didn't feel the same to me a few years ago in comparison to when I first started back in 2005. Like shit's just different. And I have kind of been trying to figure out in my head, like, why am I not comfortable with that word? What am I grappling with? And I mean, I know like legit why I'm uncomfortable with using it, because I know I can't keep people safe, but I didn't have an alternative to that. So I appreciate you, Karen, for bringing that up, because now I'm going to use it and give you credit for that.
Okay, so for our next question, what does healthy communication look like in a sexual relationship?
Okay, Constance, I feel like we just making googly eyes at each other, like, who gonna go first? This shit is
Waiting
ridiculous.
for Erica to speak up. Come on, Erica.
I was just about to be like, it's not me. I know that. Go ahead, y'all. Y'all got it. I'll come in at the end. I was like, we just gonna look at each other like, y'all are pretty, but like, who's gonna answer? Like, y'all are pretty, but who's gonna answer?
Come on now.
Okay, all right. So I like legit just taught about this at 3:00 to teenagers today. So let me just go ahead and so you said, show me the question again. Healthy sexual communication, is that what you said? I want to make sure I'm using the right words. Okay. All right. So yes, healthy communication look like in a sexual relationship. So, the way that I usually go about this is talking about the different types of communication, whether you're doing aggressive, assertive, or passive. I'm talking about how, assertive communication is usually a great place to start because it's a way for you to voice very adamantly exactly what you need and what you want from people in a relationship, regardless of if it's romantic, platonic, if it's with your grandma, with your friends, with your aunties, it doesn't matter. You state what you want and what you need to feel safe and to feel like your opinions and your needs matter. And then you also have the ability to say that without making it seem like anyone else's needs and wants don't matter, right? So you're being welcoming, you're listening, you're using a tone that, is not being really kind of aggressive and forceful about what you need, but you're also being very adamant about what it is that you need. You're not leaving stuff out, right? So the more that you can have those open and honest dialogues, even just starting at like what your boundaries are, what your expectations are for communication in a relationship. Is it going to bother you if you go to sleep without talking to your partner? Or is it going to bother you if you wake up and don't have a text message? Is it going to be, a thing for you if you don't know when they get home safe? Or do you not need that type of communication? I mean, those are just examples, right? But like, just making sure that you're having that conversation up front so that people know what it is that you need, so they know how to show up for you and vice versa, just as a base. And of course, sexual history, but I'll let one of y'all do that.
Yeah, I think I really like all that Erica has said, and I just wanted to echo that and add on to say, communication has to have space for forgiveness. It has space to acknowledge that there's going to be times where we don't communicate things perfectly or well to each other, and there's got to be space for both the assumption of best intent, but also a space for accountability for impact. And then also just some space for forgiveness. I think a lot of times what we've seen in our world currently is that communication has become very aggressive and very one-sided. And so I think what makes something, the opposite of that is required in a healthy sexual relationship, in a healthy relationship period, right? Because you really need that space to have things fail and to be able to communicate about that without destroying the other person. And making sure that they feel edified.
Thank you for those beautiful answers. I'm hoping people are taking away that advice and really looking about how they communicate with their partners, especially. Okay, so a little bit of a heavier question, but how does white supremacy currently and historically create an unsafe space for sexual exploration for Black communities domestically and internationally?
Hey, okay, so this is definitely a deep question, but I think if I look at white supremacy and I realize, look at how deeply socialized we are into, and this is where I'm gonna use that word, Erica, fetishization. Black people, especially Black women, and of course, Black men that dress up like Black women, would be fetishized, right? Of course they would, because originally the thought is that, Black girls, especially, and Black women were highly touted as, racially and sexually promiscuous. That was the scene. And that gave permission for white folks to do as they wanted to with the Black woman body. And so when that translates, in however way it translates, I think that it has constantly been a historically unsafe space for women are automatically. And then when you add that intersection of like Black woman or Black and gay or something that is obscure or something that you can't touch or you don't understand, but you can look at and say, it's pretty and I want that. And then of course, white supremacy says, well, you can have that. You get to conquer that, right? And so when we look at how white supremacy has enabled people to do things and then not have any consequences for it, right? Because Black people didn't feel as much, introduce gynecological experiments, So when you think about all those ways that Black people have been exploited sexually, it was something where we don't talk about it because we didn't talk about, sexual things that have happened traumatically. Like Black people talking about trauma is something that is currently happening, and I'm so glad it's happening, but like we don't have the templates for those conversations. We know how to keep going. And so when we look at that, I think that white supremacy has created a space that doesn't give value or equality when it comes to speaking up. It says that Black women or Black folks don't deserve to have pleasure, as Erica was mentioning before, that it is an act of, procreation or being someone's property. And then also it has given us not a safe space to talk about things that have occurred to our bodies on the account of someone else. And so I think it has created this really tough dynamic where some people get to the point where they're just like, well, never mind. Like, I don't even want to deal with sexuality. And so I think that is the historical context around what white supremacy has created, because it's a really tricky slope. And then you're seen as subversive or you're seen as rebellious when you do talk about it. So it's like all these things and all this nuance there. And sometimes it's just easier to be quiet about it, shrink about it, and not really pursue pleasure and sex in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, in addition to that, when I talk to Black women about embracing, their bodies and the acceptance of pleasure, and even just realizing that they deserve pleasure, right? Like just for existing, you deserve pleasure, and that's it. It's been really eye-opening for me to realize how internalized the like white supremacist like ideals have been even within our own community, because we don't think we deserve that. Or if we see somebody who's openly, embracing their pleasure, embracing their body and their sexuality, then we think something's wrong with them and we start judging them instead of thinking, oh, well, damn, maybe I should try that on and see what that feel like, because she looked real happy, right? Like instead of actually like embracing what we see our sisters and brothers doing in the streets, we just think, I don't know, that don't look right to me. We have a whole generation of people who out here calling 10-year-olds fast because they think that, them wearing clothes that actually fit their body or talking to people in a certain way or the way they walk and blah, 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 and all this bullshit is like, it's all internalized shit from history that prevented us from being able to just exist as we are. Everything about our culture is meant to be accepting of who we are, the way we move our bodies, the way we dance, the way we carry our children, the way we fucking exist in a space, the way we walk into a room is meant to be an embodiment of how we love who we are, right? And the way that white supremacy has worked is to take that shit away from us, to the point where people aren't waking up to their own pleasure and their own sense of empowerment until their 30s, 40s, because we don't think we have the option. We don't think it's accessible for us, right? So it's this continuous cycle. So when I'm teaching kids, when I say kids, I mean, you know, middle schoolers, high schoolers, I start talking about pleasure in terms of what activities do you like to do? What activities do your bodies feel comfortable doing? Is it sports? Is it music? Is it theater? Is it like, we talking about basic level pleasure principles, right? I want you to know what pleasure feels like in its very like foundational sense. And then we can expand on that later, but right now, just know that you can experience pleasure in multiple ways and it doesn't have to be sexual, right? So like just some other thoughts too.
You know, this is one of my favorite questions, you know, because I really like to talk about white supremacy because of the way in which it is a system that has impacted all aspects of our lives as American people, right? Like, I cannot speak for, you know, it's different in other countries, but for as American people, you know, I think about, you know, Erica's talking about pleasure, and like white supremacy, you know, insists that we don't have pleasure, right? Like the pleasure is not on our bodies, ourselves, our communities. It's on like, it bases it on materialism. So how many things can you gather? How much money can you gather? How much? And so it's not safe in many ways to explore yourself because you're a commodity, right? Like that's not, you don't want your things to have feelings, right? Like that just doesn't make sense. You can't sell them as quickly, or, you know, like it changes the ability to trade them and toss them around, right? If you actually accord them some measure of humanity. So I feel like white supremacy in many ways does a lot of things of one, kind of stunting or blunting our feelings and affections and like pleasure and feelings and intimacy, and all, it blunts those things because you can't trade people off with those things intact. And it also kind of it forces us to kind of conform to some sense of like, you know, we have to achieve all these things to be relevant, right? And the achieving of things also means sacrificing those relationships. So again, it's hard to explore yourself if you cut that part of you off to make that dollar or to make that next step or to like participate in this system of white supremacy, to gain power, to bring, you know, privilege, whatever. Like everything about like white supremacy like cuts us off from ourselves, and for the purpose of making the next dollar, purpose of making the next object, to build that aspect of power or that version of power and wealth. Then you add in the part of like Christian white supremacy, which equates sexuality as a negative, which equates Black bodies as negative and as evil, which equates basic pleasure and being able to explore oneself and something as basic as masturbation as sin and as damning, right? Those things that make it really hard for someone to explore oneself and their sexuality. And so I think as a sex educator, and this is actually something that, you know, I'm working on another project, is like, we have to talk about racism. We have to talk about white supremacy when we're talking about how to create safe spaces for Black folks, or creating spaces where we can do restorative work and healing work, so we can get us free, right, from this colonized mind. Like, we have to talk about the impact of white supremacy. Otherwise, we're not getting at the root.
I have to admit, I didn't understand the impact that white supremacy definitely had on pleasure and exploration of pleasure until I met you wonderful people. Like, when you guys mentioned the term white supremacy in it, I only see white supremacy when you're talking about systematic racism, when you're talking about individualized racism or internalized racism, and how it facilitates in stuff like colorism, how it facilitates into our textures of our hair and the way we talk, or like any type of black on black conflict that does occur. But I never really thought about it in like the sexual body, the sexual being of an individual. And I always thought about it in a religious standpoint, like, okay, like religiously it was used to oppress, but I never really combined two and two, especially with the colonization of African nations that were forced to learn damned for many of their practice. So it was really eye-opening just to hear this.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, real quick, I just want to reiterate, right? Like even our standards of beauty, right? Like you just said, the colorism, that stuff, like white supremacy has impacted all of that. And in that creating that, like that image of what is appropriate, what's right. And anything outside of that is made into an illness, right? We pathologize difference. And that's white supremacy. That's a lot of white supremacy.
And I will add this quote. It's just something that operates everywhere, and it speaks truly to Constance and Erica's statements. But race is the prism through which all other differences are cast, right? And so when you want to go back to the root of something, anything we're talking about current day America, like just start at white supremacy, and you'll see how that has trickled down systematically into the individual things and the internalized things and the way in the communities, literally physically how the communities are set up. You'll see it throughout all of everything.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next question. This is especially up Constance and Erica's ring. Karen's ring. My bad. How detrimental is the lack of proper cohesive sex education, especially in the LGBTQ plus community and the religious Black communities?
Constance, you better go on. I'm writing this quote in this chat here now.
Oh, my bad. Okay. You know, I think it's obviously detrimental to not have proper sex education. I think again, when you add when you add lack of information to unquestioned authority, like it creates a really dangerous situation, right? So if you have, for example, if we're not teaching sex ed in communities of faith, but we're preaching over pulpits, like don't have sex or stay with your husband, and that's the most, high thing you can do is one, have a husband, and two, stay with them. And three, and produce children, right? If we keep pushing that as the goal for all of people, and then we ask people to approach that without any question, like unchecked authority, but then we don't talk about pleasure. We don't talk about I know this is probably not maybe y'all know this, but there really is no secret. Like there isn't magic that happens in one's wedding night that suddenly makes sex great. Like I hate to break this to people. I'm so sorry if you've never heard this before. Like, take a breath. But this whole thing of wait till marriage and then somehow sexuality will be great is some bullshit, right? Like if one doesn't explore one's own pleasure with masturbation, with feeling oneself and having pleasure in self and feeling and just kind of acknowledging one's own body, like being married, being in a relationship doesn't suddenly just make that work, right? So I think the ways in which not talking about proper sex education from healthy relationships, learning how to negotiate sexuality, right? Learning how to say like, babe, I don't feel like having sex tonight. And then know you have the agency to hold no, really, I don't want to do this. And then hold other people accountable for when they cross your boundaries and like having boundaries, like all of those things that come through good sex education, like we are denying people of faith in many traditions, right? We're denying them that power of knowledge. and that power of affirmation that they need to have these skills. Instead, we're replacing it with some cheap theology in many spaces that then causes them to look the other way, right? Causes them to not go and get basic sex, STI testing because you're not having sex and it's wrong, right? Like, or causes them to deny how they feel in their bodies. So of course, no, I'm not gay, no, I'm not trans, that would be wrong. Like, in that regard, like, we are creating the dysfunction that's unnecessary, and it's in many ways, like, quite frankly, ungodly. Like, that ain't what Jesus died for. So I think there's a lot to say that, like, that not having proper comprehensive sex education, it takes away folks' ability to ask questions differently, and then to hold leadership accountable when those answers don't come well, particularly in religious Black communities.
I have this, that is, yep, that ain't what Jesus died for. I'm so glad you said that. I just remember being in church so many times and sitting there and thinking, I don't think this is what Jesus is about. I was raised Pentecostal, and even when my dad would be studying, he was a minister, and I would be like, okay. But when I look at, like, the lack of proper, there's a couple things a couple stories that I want to share that, like, could help. When I look at the lack of proper, like, for it not to be talked about, there were times when, and in church, you got sat down and something happened. So a lot of women would turn up pregnant because they didn't have any education on what was about to happen. And being the person that I am in the relationships I had, I said, well, what's it like? You know what I'm saying? Like, is it good? Like, what's going on? And they were like, man, it was like like, they would be so upset and be pregnant, be a whole child in them, and they didn't even get 5 good humps. You know what I'm saying? So, like, when we're talking about it, it was one of those things where, it obviously continues to keep people from pleasure, and it keeps the focus about being abstinent. And so that, to me, that zero tolerance in anything, in my opinion, but that zero tolerance as opposed to being harm reduction, and like, here's condoms, here's how to use them, here's what will happen, here are sexually transmitted disease, like, all these things are possible. If you don't know them, then you're getting, you have the possibility of having these things happen. And then it's like, now you're in some way possibly traumatized and with no direction either. And definitely no one to come and talk to you without shaming you or guilting you. And you already feel whatever it is you have, if it's a child, if it's a sexually transmitted disease, like, whatever it is, you're going to be in a space where you're like, I'm already in a bad space. I don't need to go to somebody and now I have to ask questions and talk about all these things or what have you. So with our youth, what I really appreciate about them, a lot of them are asexual and aromantic. And so when they're looking at, this is hilarious, watching Tiffany and Constance go back and forth in the chat. So when I'm looking at aromantic and asexual, our youth are really, or demisexual. So aromantic means without romantic connection and not looking for romantic connection. Asexual means they're not looking for physical activity. And then when I look at demisexual, that means there has to be an emotional connection of some sort before romance or physicality happens or occurs. So with that, and I ascribe to, demisexual. So when I think about that and I look at that, like, for a long time, I thought something was wrong with me, because I was like, why are all these people having all these experiences? And I'm kind of like, I'll go play basketball, or I'll go do this, or I'll go do that. And it wasn't moving me. You know what I mean? And I didn't have the safe space to talk about it because people were relationship, boy or girl crazy at the time, depending. And, to have those conversations, I didn't have a space to have those conversations. So I went on about my life and did my thing. But at the end of the day, like, I wasn't able to explore my identity. And so that's when you get to someone like myself, where, at 30, like we mentioned before, at 30, that's when I'm really able to sit down and look at the gender unicorn and say, okay, well, what's my life look like? This makes sense. And so for me, that makes a lot of things make sense now that they didn't, but I had to figure that out and stumble upon it on my own. And it just would have been really nice and easy to have someone that had this kind of information, or to kind of have these conversations. If I had an Erica as a young person, like, how would that have looked for me? If I would have been able to talk to somebody like Constance as a young person, like, what would that have looked like? What would a kaleidoscope look like for me as a young person, to be able to not be shamed walking in there and saying I need condoms, and it being like, get them, no big deal, like take care, be safe, stay safe, we'll talk to you soon. And so that would be nice, and I think that would definitely start to change the culture that we have around body positivity, sex positivity, and just affirmation in general.
I just, listening to Karen, I mean, it just reminds me of the reality is that like pleasure created us, right? Like if you're a Christian and you like the biblical text, like in the beginning God created heaven and earth, and God said it was good, right? So there's something about creation that pleasured God. God said it was good. It was so good that on the sixth day God rested, right? Like this may sound sacrilegious. I'm fine. Okay, fine. But like it's almost orgasmic, right? Like after orgasm, orgasm is that release in which one rests, and it's like, oh God, like, whew, you know what I mean? Like a good orgasm. Let me preface that with a good, whatever. Okay, so a good orgasm, right? Like, I feel like I think when we think about like being able to talk about sex education in a way and just the knowledge of our bodies and ourselves, it creates a better connection for us to be in relationship with ourselves, with each other, with our partners, like, and not having that information and even knowing that, again, like pleasure is something that can be in us, something that created us and something that allows us to create, like it's majorly detrimental, right? I think it cuts us off from like the divine in a very primitive way, each other and ourselves.
I saw Karen reaching for something. I was like, oh, is she gonna type or is she gonna unmute herself? Oh, I love the banter in the chat as well. And I think I really love the fact that you guys speak on the hypocrisy that you do see sometimes within the church, in that aspect of like you're always preach abstinence is the way. Why would you go down a route of like sexual immorality and such like that, when the minute, and I experienced this in my as a 22-year-old, the minute you're like of age to like get married, it's where is the babies? Where's your boyfriend? Where is the wedding night? Where is the proposal? Like now sex is like transformed into this thing of that's bad, it's a sin, it's immoral, into this, you have to do this. Like this is your obligation, this is your not right, but like it's your obligation to us, not even just to yourself, to us. It's your obligation to bring us kids and to get married and to settle down and stick with a husband through and through, even if he ain't shit, type of thing, which is very detrimental because it doesn't make sex good no matter what. Okay, but thank you. We're gonna resume sharing, and then we're going to proceed to our next question is, how can individuals that exist in toxic or like sheltered environments still navigate their sexual journey, sexual exploration journey?
I just want to say, real quickly, I think one of the first things that's really important to a journey is just to be curious. This has become a really important value to me in the last couple of years, because it literally, curiosity saved my life, right? Like people, curiosity killed a cat. No, not always. Sometimes curiosity makes you wonder if something can be different. And so if you are feeling like, shit, I'm tired of being angry at my body, I'm tired of like hating myself, I'm tired of like feeling sexual urges and then being like, man, I shouldn't feel that. Like it's exhausting. We put energy into that, right? And so I feel like at some point when there's that curiosity to like, man, could this be better? Or are there other people who may feel this way? Or like maybe if I tell someone they can help me, is a great way to kind of begin exploration of one's sexual life.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that I was going to say too. I think it's important to acknowledge that curiosity is okay. And, also kind of letting people know that creating a space for yourself where you feel safe with just you and just your body to explore however feels comfortable is probably one of the best gifts you can give yourself, right? I mean, the sense of I don't know, just, you know, agency over your body when you can know what's happening, like when you can know what feels good, when you can communicate those things, is an experience that I think everybody, you know, deserves to have. But it's important to make sure that they don't feel shamed for wanting to create that space for themselves, because a lot of times in these toxic or sheltered environments, they thrive off of not having any boundaries. So in an act of wanting to have self-exploration, you are in fact setting a boundary. And so whoever is involved in that toxic, you know, relationship or that environment where you're not, you know, kind of given the time or the space to do things that don't involve somebody knowing what you're doing all the time, or somebody controlling you, like that can be a hard thing to break, to know that just wanting to have that space for yourself and setting that boundary for yourself is okay. So, you know, it's an interesting, you know, sort of line to navigate, because it really just kind of depends. In my experience, it depends on who I'm talking to, how I, you know, encourage them to navigate these things. Because sometimes we have to just start with believing that the thought of wanting to navigate a sexual journey is okay. Then sometimes we're talking about how to actually physically start that journey. Other times we're talking about how to enhance it, right? So I think it just kind of depends on where the person is at, where they feel comfortable, and trying to, as a sex educator, at least my, you know, my hope is to create a space within me that they feel comfortable talking to about that, and to know that if nowhere else with me, they're comfortable and they're okay, and I can make them safer, shout out to Karen, for, you know, wanting to explore those sorts of things. So yeah, just to build off of what Constance was saying.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to go to our next question. And I'm sharing. So our next question is, what does allyship look like in the Black community, and other people of color communities to the Black community, and then in white communities to the Black community?
So when I do conversations or facilitations around this, I pretty much use a very basic model in terms of how to approach this, because allyship is tricky, right? And so when we're looking at allyship, you can really, for any other marginalized group, like it's not actually applicable to the groups in power. And that's how we define that. But allyship can look like any other group that is marginalized, advocating and standing alongside and supporting. So when I look at what that means, it's a very, very large and nuanced concept. So the ways I say to do that is to pause, right? That's the first thing you want to do. And I think that applies to a lot of people, but it's to pause, look around the room, right? So as someone who has multiple intersections, but visibly Black, when I walk in a room, I know where the exits are. I see if I'm the only one in that room. I'm looking around and I'm checking for my safety immediately off rip. So when I look at that and think about the pause, if you're not looking around in the room, that's a privilege first and foremost. So if you're not looking around the room to make sure you're safe, to make sure that, you know, no threat is presently in front of you, then that's a privilege. And then read the room. Like how many people are in the room like you? You know, those are things that I notice all the time, because I'm like, okay, how do I have to show up in this room? All right, how many microaggressions am I going to get in this room today, right? So when you think about that, that's another thing to think about. Read the room, and then you want to engage. And so this is really reactive, actually, because a lot of times people are going to be saying things. So that to me may mean that, like, if it's something like, oh, somebody keeps saying, hey guys, like, can I deal with that? Can that be small? Yes. Do I notice it? Absolutely. but someone who doesn't have like a certain lens or have those experiences may not see that. And so what that looks like maybe sometimes is pulling somebody aside and being like, you know, there are like other ways to say that. So maybe we say folks, maybe we say y'all, maybe we say everyone, hey friends, people, how you doing? And so it could be something as simple as pulling someone aside and talking after. That is an act of allyship for those people that may be harmed microaggressively if on those comments, right? And then there's also like some deeper things where it might be something that's directly ridiculous in the middle of a meeting. Somebody saying, if one of us were to walk in, me, Constance, or Erica, and somebody be like, "Oh, you're the secretary." So somebody saying that, like, "Oh, you're taking the notes," right? Or it would an act of allyship. Now you also have to think about an allyship. Are you going to give them space? Like, right? So if I'm reading the room, am I going to give the person that was harmed space to speak for themselves? Because I don't want to step on anybody's toes and do work that they could do on their own, but it might be the end of the day. And by the end of the day, they might be microaggressed enough that they may want somebody else to speak for them. And in that case, what does that look like? That looks like them saying, you know, no, like that's a leader. That's an expert. That's the such and such. And being like, why would you say that? Like, what would make you assume that? And really start to question. And curiosity works here in terms of allyship, in terms of asking questions, because the goal is to call in as opposed to call out, because you want to have the conversation. If you care about the person, you want to have the conversation and you want them to be able to do better, right? And to be in community with them. And I think that's the important thing in allyship, because there's a lot of conversations on a day-to-day basis that I don't have with people. If I see that it's not going to go anywhere, if I see that they are not trying to hear anything, I'm not going to sit up there and jump on a bandwagon or a soapbox to not be heard. But if we're in community and we're trying to build and we're trying to understand each other, then that's one of those things. And a lot of allyship looks like listening, hearing stories, building relationship, telling things, sharing things. All those kinds of things look like that. I think in the in POC communities, I really, when we talk about how long in white supremacy and how long there's been a disparity and not a lack of visibility and representation in Black and Brown voices, especially Black voices, we center those voices. And it's gonna look like for a time, and it may feel like a threat to POC and white folks, it may look like a threat to those people to see the things turn, right? And now Black voices being centered, it feels like a threat because now my power, like, do I have the same opportunities? And I think kind of sitting with that and checking your own stuff around when Black people and Brown people are in leadership, I think that's the most important thing that people can do, is to do their own work. And that doesn't mean calling up your Black friend and asking them for things. That means using the resources that are very easily and readily available to you. And also continuing to have conversations and building relationship with people, because you can never understand the experience, but maybe you can hear more about it and know the points to avoid or what to do and how to handle and care for people that are Black and eventually POC and Indigenous, all that kind of stuff.
This reminds me of the famous proverb always uttered on Twitter: Google is free, ho. Google is free.
That's a word. YouTube is better, actually, for the videos. I'm gonna just say that. Google can get you messed up. Some stuff, Wikipedia, you can edit it, it can get weird. YouTube, though, the videos, you can then fact check, right?
Awesome. Okay. Ooh. Y'all, not me messing up and copying the slide. Thank God it's not on the screen so I can embarrass myself. Ooh. Okay. Let's go ahead and share. Okay, so then another question we have is, how can individuals who do not know where to get their sexual journeys get started? And I know you guys kind of already answered this about being curious, but what should that curiosity blossom to or turn into, or how should that like pathway start winding?
I'm waiting on Erica. Okay.
That's what I was waiting for too.
Hey, listen, I was gonna. I'm looking at you like you going, I'm going, you going, I'm going. You
okay.
go ahead. You got it for me.
Well, you know what? I have a very simple answer, really, and it's just one thing, right? Like, start with your own body. and touch the parts of your body that you are comfortable with, right? So I'm not saying go find your clitoris and play with it, right? Like you might have to work up to that, right? You might have to start with your earlobe or start with the inside of your arm, start with your nose, right? Like just find parts of your body that bring you pleasure. And that pleasure can just be peace, like it calms you. It feels good, it's smooth, you like the texture, you like the way the hair lays down in that spot, right? Like it could be just whatever it is, right? Start with something in your own body that brings you pleasure, that awakens your senses, that brings you in deeper into yourself.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. I have a foreplay map that I give out to clients, and it's a way for you to kind of explore your body from head to toe and figuring out what you like. I have a version for a solo play and then one for when you're ready to involve another person. There's a body that's a non-gendered body for yourself and a non-gendered body for your partner, and you can kind of choose to either do that exercise together or do it individually and then share what you've found together. Just kind of depends on different levels of comfortability. But without question, the first step is getting to know your body. And I mean, even like get naked and look in a mirror and start to love what you see before you even touch anything. Just love what you see. I am almost 35, two kids in. I have an entirely different body than I did 6 months ago, 3 months ago. This is an exercise that I would love for people to do consistently, knowing good and damn well I don't do it myself, right? Like it's something that even I struggle with, and I've been in this field since 2005. This is something that, I think that if I would have understood as a teenager that pleasure and acceptance starts with me first, and it wasn't based on how I could serve somebody else, the whole game would have been changed for me. I didn't even realize until I was halfway through my college experience that I could exist for me and not to be the source of pleasure for somebody else, right? And so I think that all of that starts with having an understanding of, who you are, what you look like, and loving that no matter what, right? Because you are you, and can nobody else be that. So once you can look at yourself in the mirror, and start to kind of appreciate what you have, start with the parts of your body that you visually appreciate, see how it feels when you touch it, move other places. It's all like Constance was saying, work your way up to what feels comfortable. And when something doesn't feel comfortable, don't push it if you're not ready to, right? This is literally a lifelong journey. It's something that you can do time and time again, because your pleasure areas change as your body changes. Nothing stays the same. What you liked last year isn't going to be exactly what you like this year. So this is an ongoing, kind of development and journey. And so you're kind of always starting, right? Because there's really no end to it. But once you know how to love you, then the rest, is just kind of falling into place without you realizing it.
So I guess I have a follow-up question. Sorry to kind of blindside y'all, but do you have to love yourself in order to still explore your body or get started on your sexual journey? Because sometimes
yeah, no. Oh, you did freeze. She mad frozen. Wait, because sometimes what?
Oh, me? Okay.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's easy to find love for other people, but sometimes for myself.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you asked that.
Absolutely,
because I was just about to say that for some people, and particularly for folks who have had traumatic events around their sexuality, they may not feel as comfortable with the self-pleasure, self-touch in the beginning. And I think those are the moments, and these to me are right? So I'm a Baptist minister, so just bear with me, right? Those are the God moments for me, the Rhema moments, the life-giving and life-breathing moments where you can be in relationship with someone else. And I'm not talking about marriage. I'm not talking about partner, it could just be a friend that you really trust into your intimate space. But to be in relationship with someone that you can trust them enough to reflect their pleasure in you to you. And I say that, right, as being a person who, like, nobody tell my mama I'm not a virgin, because I think she still thinks I'm a virgin, and or I might be a lesbian. I'm not sure which one she believes this week, so like, shh, nobody tell her. But I feel like the way that I got back to myself, like after a sexual assault, had to do with seeing someone else enjoy my body, and seeing their reflection helped teach me that my body was pleasurable. And then that helped spark my own curiosity into like, well, hell, like when they did this, it felt good. Let me see if I can recreate that. You know what I mean? Because I am an independent woman, and so therefore I had to figure it out for myself. Whatever, but like, no, but like seriously, like it, but having someone else that I trusted in that space and trusted their vision. I caution with that, my big caution with that is you cannot trust everyone's reflection of you. And there's a whole bunch of people in this world who reflect stuff back to you that ain't got nothing to do with you, but has to do with them and their shit. But every once in a while, you can find a person that you really trust, that you can trust them with that, and take some of that and to help you build your confidence in yourself. So I definitely feel like one, just, you know, learning how to be open to a trusted partner is huge. And then also therapy, child. Like, therapy is your friend. Go to therapy. Find a good therapist. Demand a good therapist, right? Like, the first one might not be the right one. Like, try a couple. Try different types of modalities. Maybe you need EMDR. Maybe you need a Gestalt. Maybe you need a hypnotherapist. Like, there are so many different types of therapists. Find one that will help you perhaps work through whatever barriers or boundaries or stuck points there are that are decreasing, you know, one's ability to really access pleasure. There are some folks who just do energy work and help folks shift the energy in their body. You might need someone who can practice tantra. You know, there are a bunch. You might see somebody who just pray with you. I don't know, but like, there are a billion different modalities and healers out here that really help people reclaim their bodies, reclaim their pleasure. And that's so okay. It's okay to find someone outside of yourself to help you find yourself.
I keep on like throwing like A, B, C, D questions at you, and I really do apologize. So then, does that also mean that exploiting yourself kind of does come from a place of privilege, which I'll like frame it, to have those resources, like if you don't have the money for a therapist, or you don't have the health insurance for a therapist, or you do live in like Sandusky, Ohio, that's like basically nothing, and you have to be in a small community that seems to talk. Does that mean like starting your journey can only come from like a place of privilege, or does it have to like you can start it anywhere, like you can start at any place? Like I want people to like be able to start it like in their 20s, not starting in their like 40s or 50s.
So this is a great question. I'm gonna respond to this real quick and I'm gonna shut up. That's a great question, right? Because I think what we have to realize is that therapy is not just paying somebody to go and talk to, like, that's one of them, right? That's fine. But our ancestors had therapy, right? They got together with their elders and talked through things. They go to beauty shops, they go to barber shops, right? Like, there are ways to access what therapy is therapy is a mirror. It's engaging someone who can give you hard truth that you trust, and because they have your best intention, and you know, and they have a little bit more knowledge and wisdom and perspective than you may have in that moment, right? So like, you know, it's finding someone who can help hold space for you to reflect in yourself and to kind of and move forward. I will say though that that's emotional labor. So the reason why I talk about therapists was because we pay them to do that emotional labor. So I think I want to acknowledge as well that holding space for one in that regard is some emotional labor. And so even if it's not physical, you know, money payment that someone can provide, right? Keep that in mind. How will you participate in that equal transaction? But we, this is something we do for friends. This is something that back in the day, church folks did through testimony service, right? They shared stories, they got encouragement, they got rebuked, they got, there's a whole community approach to that. So I would say for folks who maybe can't afford a therapist, like find your community of friends that you can, again, trust to hold intimacy, that you can trust to tell you hard truths, that you can tell everything to. And that takes a risk on your part as well. Absolutely, right? Therapy does not work unless you risk being open to engage it. There's no magic pill for this. Trust me, I would have taken it. But like, what I mean? Like that's the hard work on both ends, right? It's one, finding the community and the right person to trust with your life, your secrets, your everything, and then taking that risk to do so. There are a whole bunch of elderly folks right now who are lonely as hell. Find you an elderly person and just talk about life. Old people love to talk about their life. Right? So like, make their day and just listen to their stories, and then talk about that stuff. There's different ways to do therapy and engagement than just, going to see a paid therapist.
Thank you. Thank you for expanding on that. I think people need to hear that a lot because, especially here at Ohio State, it's always advertised like, you guys should just go to CCS or just go to therapy, when a number of students especially either rely on like the student health insurance, which doesn't cover many therapy sessions, or are paying out of pocket because like their parents probably don't have a job that has employer health insurance, or they're not in a household that there's employer health insurance and such like that. Everything's out of pocket. So thank you for expanding on that, and just how therapy can, not in just like a sexual realm, but just like looking for those spaces where you can confide in somebody and expand on what you're feeling and just feel a connection there. Okay, so last question for our pre-question Q&A aspect before the audience gets into their questions is, how does the exploration of sex and sexuality encounter gender violence? And this is in specific relation to Black community, but I know that white supremacy is probably gonna come up there anyway. But yeah.
All right. Pretty much Eric would be like, go Karen. I'd be like, yes, ma'am. All right, no, I'm just kidding. So when I think about, because I'm trying to really break down this question in my mind around gendered violence and the exploration of that. And I'm really thinking about Black trans women in this moment. And the reason why I'm thinking about that is just because statistically, Black trans women are targeted and killed at a very, very high rate. And so when I start to think about that, I start to think about like sex work. And I start to think about, so I'm going backwards, right? So I'm going from like the most egregious, and when I think about the people who are at the most possibility of being harmed in this space. I think about that and how people are interested in Black trans women until they find out they're a trans woman, and I truly believe that the American society is obsessed with parts. You can see gender reveals. It's strange. It's strange that we do that from the time that children are young, which is where I would actually start in terms of exploration. So it's really, really strange that our society and white supremacy, yes, and Western Europeans are so fascinated with parts, and that is still, when we look at legislation and what's happening in legislation right now currently, when you're looking at trans bodies, like there's legislation around stuff that they don't even understand. And so for people to put that, it's a check. It's a check on the box, when the doctor sees you. And then there's an intersex population that people don't even know how to talk about or deal with, which is intersex is when people come out with multiple reproductive organs. And so I think the idea of gender can be extremely oppressive anyway. under the rubric that it already is set up in American society. So when you look at white supremacy, when you look at patriarchy, when you look at heteronormativism, wow, you can see all those things present where women are subject to gendered violence, where men who are subjected in that way, like those things are the hardest things. And so, yeah, the vocab, I could spell it, but it's been a long day, I can't really say it. So when I think about the gender violence, that's kind of what I'm thinking about, is how really I'm thinking about our youth, and I'm thinking about how brave they are. Because it is something to know. We can all see what could possibly happen if you do own that about yourself. And I pray for smaller communities that are affirming. That's why I work at Kaleidoscope. But I also think about how brave that must be to continue to explore things that are taboo, that are quirky, that are weird, that are labeled as those such things, and know that there may be the consequence of maybe even your life in that sense, and you still know that that would be better than living without exploring that. And I think that is what's like so important. That's what I'll always lean to when it comes to knowing yourself and being yourself, and letting those that attract to you, because if you don't, like, it's its own death in a way. And rather the world being what it is create violence than you to do that to yourself.
Kendra, I'm really curious about this question. Can you like restate it? Because I want to make sure I understand it correctly.
Okay, so if I were to restate this question regarding how does the expression of sex and sexuality encounter gendered violence, first when I was making this question, I thought in the realm of the LGBTQ community that do face violence, women do face more violence at the hands of like even police brutality, being more likely to be imprisoned for harder charges that are caught in anything like prostitution and such like that. But then I also started to think of just cis Black women who are in their houses and their husbands or significant others inflict violence on them, and other aspects internationally, such as like women that have to face female genital mutilation. So which hinders all, not all, but definitely hinders their own sexual exploration and their pleasure sensors around their vagina. So that's what I was thinking when I was framing this question, in the sense of like, how does like specific gendered violence, like depending on specific communities, very much impact the exploration individually, but on a larger community level, their sex exploration, their sex journey, and such like that.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for that clarification. I think that what comes to mind immediately are two things. One, like power and shame. So the more we have knowledge of sexuality and how our bodies actually are wired to work, I feel like the more one is, and I hate the word empowered, but the more we understand our agency, right, to enact certain things. And I think that what a lot of our systems of oppression require is us abnegating aspects of our power to the larger system. Now, again, oppression is hella real. Yes, it is. However, we all have power still. Like we have power in some concept, in some way. And so I think what happens when we are able to explore our own sexuality, our own bodies, our own beings, right? It connects us better to ourselves, our core, our central being, to be able to better advocate for ourselves. It also helps us have some strong ass resilience to take the waves of abuse that come with trying to really be authentically yourself. I think also the where we've seen shame really come into being is with sexuality and in gender. We love to throw shame around. And so the more that we combat shame through things like story sharing and building empathy for one another and trying to like be less judgmental of people's stories, the more I think we decrease, the kind of the fodder for gender violence. Like there's this assumption that there's an other, and that other is somehow worse, less good, less deserving, less whatever than we are, and that's foolishness, right? So like the way that we have to, the way that we are able to have the juiciness, the power, the substance to push back on these systems is by kind of accessing our own life force, right? Which for me is sexuality, right? And then also connecting with each other and building the relationships that give us the power, community power, collective power, to shake those systems. But absolutely the system of shame is a motherfucker. Shame keeps people silent all day, every day. Shame keeps people in closets, literal and proverbial. Right? Like shame is something that is pumped in the through American media in huge amounts, right? Like it's the underscore of many people's faith understandings, their professional understandings, their relationship understandings. Like shame is huge. So really learning to undo shame in ourselves and in our relationships, I think, again, like sets the ground for violence to be shifted.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for answering my pre-made questions, our roundtable Q&A first part. So now we are going to go ahead and get started with our audience Q&A. We saw that one person has dropped a question. I'm not going to move from the slide yet because the other slides have the questions from the forums. But this question is from the audience. So how does someone feel desired and wanted as a dark-skinned Black woman trying to date whilst attending a PWI, which is predominantly white institution, for people who don't know, and your non-Black friends are constantly being pursued and I'm not? How do I deal or change my perspective?
I'm gonna give you the Baptist preacher answer to that, which is a Maserati on a lot still has the same value wherever it is. And we know its value, right? Like the value by the name. So like, Baptist preacher love analogies, but like, I think when you're I went to Cornell, went to Vanderbilt, right? Primarily white institutions, very, very white institutions. And it is easy to assume that because you're surrounded by people who don't reflect you, that there's something wrong with you. And unfortunately, it's an easy thing. Find people who are like you. I promise you they are out there. And especially now with like us being kind of forced to virtual space more and more, like it's even easier to find like people. If you type into Facebook, people who have 3 noses, like there's a Facebook group out there for you, right? If you type in there like people who like to lick mashed potato off of people's nipples, like there's a group for you out there somewhere. And if there's not, start one, and I guarantee you somebody else is going to join your group, right? So like, I think, unfortunately, I know as a Black woman that I already have to do an extra degree of labor to make sure I'm okay, because I'm living in a system that is not built for me to be okay. So, finding those spaces where you are around like-minded people, holding on to them, those relationships, is one thing I would say. And then again, like, I promise you, you are gorgeous, you are fine, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, do not let your circumstances determine how you value yourself. Like, I promise you, because there will be a different circumstance at some point. And you have the same value then that you have now, that you'll have in the future. Like, you're good. But this is, unfortunately, sometimes you just have to know that internally, even though the external world will not reflect it.
I mean, thank you, Constance, for that. And I think that this is speaking to the power and the importance of like affinity groups, or people are like, why do you still need all Black spaces? Or why do you still need HBCUs? Or why do you still need those type of things? And I think the fact that, you know, that has been socialized into us to be as close to passing to white as you could be to have some value, that is a deeply socialized and will turn into deeply internalized behavior and thought. And so as much as possible, be around, like Constance said, people look like you, but I really think that that speaks, you know, when I think in Columbus specifically, Zora's house, you know, is for Black women, and that's all women identified folks, women with an X, so it's inclusive. But when you look at spaces like that, we need those spaces because we don't have that, right? So when we look at spaces where, you know, it's Black owned, or we look at spaces where in the media, do we, you know, we have our dark skinned, beautiful people doing well. Do we celebrate them when they do that? You know, my sister and my mother are very dark skinned, and I mean, they're gorgeous, y'all, let me tell you. And my dad about light as white, you know what I'm saying? But he ain't white, but you might not know. But yeah, so at the end of the day, you know, growing up with that in my home and celebrating that, then realizing what that would look like, and being in the Black church. And that's one of the positive things that I would definitely say from my experience in the church, is that it was normalized seeing a range of colors in Blackness. And I think that affinity spaces are so important, and they won't be when we normalize, you know, separate colors. But until then, and I don't know if I'll see that in my lifetime, I think we should uplift, celebrate, make visible, continue to highlight those type of places.
You guys so much. Oh, thank you everyone so much. Especially because the person that asked this question, I know is a beautiful, 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 beautiful person. Like, shout out to you, boo. You look so good. Okay, so we're gonna go move on to our first form question. Hold on, is this the right question? Okay, so our first question from the Microsoft form is, where should the young people go who don't have discussions about these topics in their household? Where should they go for information? Oh my goodness, I didn't even realize I wasn't sharing the slide. My God, that's my bad. But if you're not able to get the resources, nor do you have discussions with this with your family or anybody close to you, where should you go for resources?
I'll drop a couple websites. I'll put KYC in there if you want to come talk to us.
Yeah, right. I was gonna say, well, Kaleidoscope.
We're on Discord. We're all virtual right now, so you know, if you want to get it, then I'll put the person email who you would want to get. If you're between the ages of 12 and 20, you're more than welcome to come and talk to us there. Our housing programs are 16 through 24. But we can also, you know, link you with spaces in the community to have those conversations. And I also know Planned Parenthood does a really good job in terms of peer education programs that are sexually inclusive of all gender identities and expressions.
I was gonna say, as far as you know, relationships and intimacy and things like that, loveisrespect.org is a really good resource as well. I'll put that in the chat. And then I have, you know, some fellow sexologist colleagues that are doing some really dope things that I can put in the chat as well.
Yeah, and going off of Karen mentioned Planned Parenthood. So Planned Parenthood has, which I'm gonna drop in the chat now, they have a text line. So if you text EP Now to that number, you can ask questions about sexual health and about relationship stuff, and that people will respond, like actual sex educators will respond. There's a couple other ones if I'll look for those and can send those on as well, but that's a great way to get connected. I mean, yeah. Erica is a good resource. We both have websites, we both have businesses that you can get connected to find additional sexual health information as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just go on and slide in my DMs. Happy Sex Talk. I'm gonna put it in the
Yeah, I'll drop them that's the website for mine as well.
As you both should, as you should. Okay, so we're gonna move on to our next question. This is more Karen's alley, honestly. So how does one know their gender identity?
Go to the gender unicorn, fill it out, and you'll be good to go. No, I'm just kidding. I think, oh man, this is so interesting because to figure out your gender identity, you base it on what you know. Gender unicorn is super dope. And now they have it where it's interactive on the website. And so you can you don't have to print it out and color it. You can actually move the thing and it just, yeah. And that's on, I think it's TCU ERS. So look up gender unicorn, and the first one that pops up generally is first or second one that pops up is good. But for me, gender was an exploration because I never really subscribed, and I was like a tomboy, right? So I never really subscribed to that. But at the same time, I was a college coach and I loved to dress up and be in a pencil skirt. And I was in church 5 out of 7 days a week. So, I might have some shorts under my skirt, but I was always wearing skirts and doing stuff like that. So I think there was this impression that I should be a certain way, right? So, and I'm a poet, so I've written lots of poetry about being a lady or having to subscribe to a certain type of gender. And I think that we are so binary in our thinking, and that's definitely a Western European construct, actually, because in African communities, there's the concept of both and, right? In indigenous communities, you see the concept of both and or no pronouns. And when you look at that, it really talks about who is a soul, who is a spirit, and if you think about it in a spiritual sense, about the divine and femininity versus masculinity and what that looks like, whether it's toxic, and people have found terms to do all kinds of stuff with. The point for me was when I sat down and I was like, I'm actually non-gender conforming because I don't conform to what the society says about how gender should look, about how binary it is, because I didn't want to limit myself to that. And for me, do I love sisterhood? Do I love Black womanhood? Do I subscribe to that? Do I really appreciate my body? And was that a journey? Yes. But at the end of the day, that took a lot. And for some people, they're not experiencing that. They may have some dysphoria around that. And I think that curiosity is coming back to me from Constance. Curiosity is gonna help you. And obviously safety is more than just a notion. So I would say, talk to people. I know in the media, now I'm grateful for visibility and representation. When I looked at, when I used to do some drag. And so I had my drag king had a drag queen, and I had never seen anybody do that. And when I finally found somebody doing that, I didn't have to just be a drag king. I could play with that a little bit and play with that character. And it wasn't until I was 30 that I saw that. And so when I think about visibility, that's why it's so important, is because sometimes you might not even know until you see somebody in front of you, you're like, that makes sense, or you hear an interview. So I'm grateful for technology in that way, that it is allowing a platform for a lot of people to show up and really express themselves and see things. But I'm glad we're having these conversations earlier, such situations such as this. And I think that it's an exploration, it's a journey, and I don't know if we ever arrive, and that can look different. And there are some days when I wake up and I stand in my closet and I'll say, how do I want to feel today? And that's why it's this fluidity of gender fluidity. And I think that being able to live in that mindset and be outside the binary applies in all areas and facets of my life. So the more we can be curious, the more we can step outside of really binary thinking in terms of, instead of this or this and if we can start thinking in that way, then that kind of really starts that exploration around, what does gender even mean to me? How do I define gender? And then what does that feel like or look like in my own body?
Thank you so much. Thank you for going into depth, especially about your personal experience. I hope that really resonated with other people. That really resonated with me. I personally didn't know about drag kings either, so that was actually a real like eye opener. I'm about to go look on YouTube, follow my YouTube. Um, so our final form question, and if you have any more questions, please drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A box. We're going to be here for a while. Well, not a while, for a little bit longer. I said a while, my God, it is like 8, almost 8, 9, it's almost 9. So y'all go do your schoolwork if you have to. But our final question is being sexually give a little bit more context, not weird. The person I reached out to, did I freeze? Oh no! And am I all frozen? Thank God. Sorry, I just said that your internet was unstable. Y'all, my heart dropped my booty hole. That person was specifically asking that question in hetero relationships, but at the same time, relationships that do involve actually having sex with your significant other. So probably a little less of, but it's like also in the realm of like a demisexual, like they have a romantic relationship with that person. So they want to know, like, is being sexually compatible in a relationship that does involve sexual encounters important to the longevity of a relationship?
Well, I can start. I'm sure everybody has some input on this, but I think that, you know, the answer to this question isn't just a one-off for everybody. I think that it's really based on the individuals and the individuals as themselves, and then also as the couple. It depends on how important and how often, you know, sex is and occurs in their relationship. But I also want to stress that there are more ways to be intimate than just having sex. So even if, you know, having sex more often is not something that you are interested in, there are literally hundreds of ways to be intimate with somebody, because, you know, sex isn't always about sex, right? So the feeling that you get from having an encounter with somebody can exist watching a movie on a couch, having like uninterrupted time for 30 minutes when kids aren't running around your house. Oh, was that my personal story? Okay. You know, just like you know, it's just, I think what, in my opinion and in my experience, of course, you know, I'm only 35 myself, and I am in the beginning of a long relationship, but I'm still young in this world. But what gets a relationship lasting is communication. As long as you are always in step with each other, and you know at any given like point in your relationship what each other wants, because your sexual compatibleness is not going to be consistent throughout your relationship. If you're going to be with somebody for a long time, you go in and out of waves where you want to be around them and touching them and all up in their shit all the time, to like where it's just, I don't know, we in the same room for 48 hours, I can't, let me go upstairs. You just don't know where your relationship's going to take you. So the more often that you have open communication about where you're at, what you need, and how, you know, how you can kind of fulfill those needs for your partner or partners as well, is crucial to longevity. And that really, when you look at it from that standpoint, you know, sexual compatibility is really just a part of that. But for some people, it's a big part. So that's why I say, you know, it really kind of depends on the relationship and the people. But, you know, if it's something that is really strong in your belief system that, like, you know, sexual compatibility makes a relationship last, then find you somebody who feels the same way, and then you won't have to stress about it. You know what I mean? Because there's no sense in trying to force a puzzle piece into a space where it don't work. It's going to be frustrating. Everybody's going to end up stressed. Everybody's going to end up doubting themselves. There are ways that you can work around it, sure, but if foundationally y'all don't believe the same thing about sexual compatibility, you don't want to force somebody to change like what they believe, right? To be with you, like that's not love. That's not something that you would want somebody to do. So, you know, that's just kind of like my initial thoughts on that. I don't know, Karen and Constance, if you have anything else to add to that.
I'm thinking around, so I know it's not often talked about, but I am polyamorous. Some people will call it ethical non-monogamy. But one of the things that once I started practicing, like first of all, I looked back over my whole life and I was like, this makes so much sense, because I wasn't getting jealous. I was supposed to be, apparently, a lot of times. And I was like, that's so beautiful that somebody else loved me too. Like, I don't know. I never really was that kind of person. And like being in a relationship where like that, the first thing we all said, like probably about 6 months in, and like a little polycule, if you want to call it, was like, man, we talk so much. We talk so much. Nobody's like, everybody probably thinks that like polyamorous people are, you know, non-monogamous. They're out here just like, you know, hippie style, in the wind, Woodstock style, getting it. And really what we're doing is we're sitting down and having a lot of conversations about what this looks like, what are boundaries, what are things that people need, and how do we try to meet as many needs as possible. And I think that could apply and be fantastic in monogamous relationships, because then you know what you're really looking for. And I think that understanding like sex drive, understanding, I'm also like, you should know your attachment style. I'm also like, you should know your love languages. I'm also like, you should know your trauma. And so what I'll say to that is that like your own understanding of yourself sexually and what you like and don't like is an inside job. And so like, get that together first, because how will you even know? And like, that's when you see people get in that are in these relationships for a really long time and neglect self and neglect exploration. Like it can become difficult because somebody's changed, or one person has changed in one way and the other person has changed in a different way, and it creates that space. And I just think it's constantly being able to talk about it. And I have to continue to do my work in terms of myself, my trauma, my youth, how I was raised, the socializations that I have to keep doing that work, first of all, to be able to hear something and not take it personally. And also like in the polyamorous space, like it's also like, you know, hey, maybe I'm the crooner, okay? Maybe I'm Brian McKnight, and maybe you want, you know, Lil Jon over there on certain nights. I'm not gonna be that. I can't be that. I can't be certain things. I don't want to be. And so if you want that, like you have all the freedom and permission to go get that. And I hope you do, right? But like everybody's not gonna have that conversation. Or it's like, if it's, I can only have this, like, are you looking at people as, you know, if somebody starts to tell me like, I wanna have it this many times a week, I'm like, that's great. And Brian McKnight could not be Lil Jon, absolutely not. But when you think about like what that means, is it property? Like, because they may have some stuff to heal, and like, how do I approach that? So is it a safer space? Hopefully it's the safest space for you if that's your person, if that's a monogamous relationship, that's your one-on-one. But I think those conversations are important. It's important to know yourself, and it's important to know how you are, right? And who you are showing up to in a relationship.
I think also, I mean, I think I love what Erica and Karen have said, absolutely. I think also just underscoring the importance of radical honesty. You hear it a lot, that word, but like really becoming very honest with yourself about what you need, what you want. Again, your attachment style, you know, what type of physical intimacy do you want? What type of emotional intimacy? Like the more honest you can become with yourself and just accepting what is in this space, the better, right? We are fluid beings. Things may shift, change, whatever over time. That's fine. But in this moment, like, who are you for real? And not what you think people want from you, not what you have been expected to be. Like, who are you? Because that's who's going to show up in the relationship. And I also think it really begs for us to expand the conversation about what is sex, and what does sexual compatibility mean, right? Like, there are some folks who have wonderful romantic relationships who don't ever have sex, or who have sex once a year, and that is fine for their relationship. And then you have other folks who, just, there's so many different versions of relationships. So it really begs the question of expanding, one, our understanding of what sex is, what's sexy to people, and also, becoming really honest with ourselves and with each other about what it is that we need and want. Going back to this question about like white supremacy, white supremacy again forces us to this, to the sameness, right? It strips away diversity and difference and pretends like there's only one monolith of people, or vision of beauty or expectation or type of family. And fortunately, like, that's not true. That's absolutely not true. And so part of really reclaiming our whole selves is, again, being able to be honest about who we are, what we like, how we like it, and then being honest with those folks who approach us to find, and it's shifting our model. Right? It's shifting from a scarcity model where we're like, oh my God, I gotta find the one right now because the rest of them are locked up, or the rest of them are over there, or whatever, to one that's of abundance, that says, you know what, there are plenty, like, universe will provide, like God will provide, like there will be who I need to connect with. If I can honestly show up as myself in the world, that person will come to me, or persons will come to me. But that like radical honesty to me is the foundation of that.
Thank you. Thank you all for the advice, for the guidance, for joining us tonight. Thank you to the audience members for asking questions. Thank you guys for filling out the form, sticking with us throughout this. I know we went over, I know the flyer said 7 to 8:30, but you're not gonna sit here and not listening to these beautiful Black women with an X. I know y'all stuck to the end. I'm really happy for y'all. I'm really proud of y'all. eBoard, go ahead and turn on your cameras again. So to wrap up our meeting in traditional AYL style, and eBoard, you gotta unmute too. If you're still there, please say you're still there. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm seeing chats. Not I look crusty, not Madam President. Madam President. I'm gonna give Stacy's throat a break, and I'm gonna go, and you guys can recite after me. All right. To unite African students.
To unite
African students.
To promote and maintain African culture.
To promote
and maintain African culture.
This always makes me laugh. To raise awareness in the community.
To raise awareness in the community.
Oh, you forgot. Thank y'all so much for coming through today. It was I'm just here, like, sitting here taking in a lot of information and just like taking notes, but also I'll also like to take this opportunity to invite you all to our virtual African night. The flyers will be coming out. Trust and believe, every year is so exciting, and you get to see dances, poetry, just like different types of performance. So if you see the flyers around, please come through. I know people can't see me right now. You're probably wondering, who is this? I'm the president of AYL. But yeah, thank y'all so much for coming through.
All right. Y'all, that wraps up our, wow, English. I've been speaking it all night, and all of a sudden I can't speak it. That wraps up our night. Thank you guys for showing up, for filling ourselves. If you want to, girl, not me closing out this.
Hold on, wait. Hey, this is Erica, in case you don't know. I have a company called Happy Sex Talk. I'm also hosting a Valentine's Day sex trivia event on Sunday from 6 to 8. I'm gonna put my website in the chat so y'all can check that out when you want to come.
Awesome. On the screen, you'll see Erica's contact information. You can hit her up through any means. You even got a LinkedIn if you want to connect with her on it. I know I am after this. Erin's information is also on the screen. Connect with them, talk with them. Constance is a little bit harder to find, but she's a little bit off the grid. So if you want to get through her, kind of get through Erica.
I can't. The feds find me now.
She said,
Nope.
not my government name everywhere. No.
Nope.
And that's on period. But thank you guys for coming tonight. You guys are free to go and show people this presentation. We did not record this for nothing. So it will be up on hopefully AWL's website and our link tree soon enough. But yeah, show them this presentation. And if you ever want to send signals to your partner and they're not getting it, show them this video. Tell them this is the time snap you need to watch. I need you to listen to everything they say. Write me a one-page reflection paper about it so you understand what's going on. But yeah, you guys are free to go. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. Not a reflection page. Sometimes you got to.
Where the horn at? Where the horn at? All right, y'all.
Okay. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Ooh.
Don't end it, girl. Don't.
Okay.
Wait, I have an exam to get to like real fast, but you didn't.
Oh no, not you, Hollis. Sorry.